fifth grade Parker Panthers. This is Mrs. Warren again with our book guest. I've already recorded chapter 1. Today I'm going to record chapter 2. A little bit of a recap from chapter 1. Our main character is Molly Cloverall, and we learn that she's not too happy that she has to take care of her baby brother and that she would rather be out playing down the lane with her friends. There is a belief back in this time that if you praised a baby, if you said a baby was very cute or very sweet, that these invisible people called the kind folks would come and take your baby and then replace it with one of their babies, which were kind of ugly and kind of caused a lot of mischief. So unfortunately, Molly does not heed that advice, and she talks about her baby brother being beautiful. And even more importantly, she takes his protection charm that he wears around his neck, and she decides that it's so pretty, she wants to wear it around her neck for a while. So in that time, all of a sudden, everything kind of changes. It kind of goes upside down. And then when she's able to sit up and go check on her baby brother, she finds out indeed that her baby brother is gone and that he has been replaced with a changeling. She doesn't know what has happened yet until she goes home, and then Granny Hedgepath, the old kind of scary woman who knows a lot of things, lets Molly and her family know that. Her mother is very upset. Her father is so upset that he says he's not going to return home, and this has left Molly wondering what in the world she can do. So we're going to dive into chapter 2. I hope you enjoy. When I opened my eyes, I was lying flat on my back in the garden. I got to my feet slowly, lightheaded from the heat, and as weak-legged as if I'd run to the top of Cattail Hill and down the other side. The cloud was gone and the sun shone. Hens pecked in the dirt, a robin sang from its perch on a fence post, bees buzzed, a cool breeze blew through the leaves, the crow had left its perch. My brother was just as I had left him, sound asleep on the quilt. Bending over him, I tickled the sole of his foot to wake him, but instead of laughing and stretching out his arms to be picked up, he began to cry. His face turned an ugly shade of red. His screams sounded more like a cat than a baby. When I tried to lift him, he kicked and hit me. Pulling the locket out of my dress, I offered it to him, but he screamed at its touch. "Thomas!" I cried. "Thomas, it's me, Molly. What's wrong? Why are you crying?" Thomas ignored me and continued to scream and kick. After a struggle, I finally got a grip on the squirming baby and carried him, shrieking with rage, into the cottage. Ma'am ran to meet us. "Whatever's the matter with Thomas? Is he bee stung? Spider bit?" When she tried to take him in her arms, he fought her just as he had fought me. He screeched and howled as if he'd never stop. "Quick, Molly," Ma'am said. "Fill a tub with cool water. He's suffering from the heat." On shaky legs, I ran to the well and drew a pail of water. Ma'am hadn't noticed that Thomas wasn't wearing the necklace. I put it around his neck later, when he calmed down and no one was looking. So one of the things you might have noticed is in order to get cool water, she has to go to a well and then put a pail down and then bring it up. So that's one of the hints from the book that this is in a much older time than we have right now. Ma'am examined him but found no sign of sting or bite. Soon he began to scream again. Ma'am wrapped him in a soft blanket and rocked him in her arms. Nothing she did calmed him. If anything, Thomas screamed louder. "Fetch Granny Hedgepath, Molly," Ma'am cried. "Make haste." Full of fear and dread, I ran into the lane, up Cattail Hill, and down the other side. Behind me was Thomas, perhaps dead already, and before me was Granny Hedgepath. Only out of love for Thomas would I go to her door and knock. "What do you want, girl?" The old woman's voice was as harsh and merciless as a crow's. "Can't I have a moment's peace without some fool child hammering at my door?" Please, Granny, it's Thomas, I said, gasping. He's screaming like a banshee and won't let Mom or me touch him. Ma'am sent me to fetch you. Can you please come? He's only a wee baby. Tush! Most likely it's nothing more than a spider bite or a bee sting. She began to close the door, but I cried, Ma'am already looked him over. There's not a mark on him. Thomas never cries. He's the best. Oh, fie, girl, shut your mouth. You never know who's listening, do you? Granny Hedgepath frowned, but she hobbled inside to get her medicine bag. From the open door, I saw an old table and a spindly chair. Dried herbs dangled in bunches from the rafters. The rest of the cottage hid in the shadows, which seemed unnaturally thick in the corners. Granny stepped outside as quiet as a mouse in a room full of cats. Scowling and muttering to herself, she pinched my arm. Come along, Sam Cloverall's girl. You'll see nothing in my cottage but what I want you to see. I ran beside the old woman to keep up with her long strides. Although I spoke not a word, Granny continued to mumble and mutter. It was clear she disliked me. But what did it matter? I'd come to get her to get help for Thomas. Once he was cured, I'd never visit her cottage. Whatever went on inside, I wanted nothing to do with any of it. Long before we reached the gate, we heard Thomas screeching. It's as if he's become pretend Thomas, I said. You know how we all say he's awful so they won't. Granny turned to me, her face fierce with anger. Hush! Not another word from you, girl! I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from saying something sassy and followed the old woman into our cottage. Pushing Ma'am aside, Granny bent over Thomas. She poked and prodded, she looked, she even sniffed. Finally, she straightened up and stared Ma'am right in the eye. You must be brave and not flinch from what I'm about to tell you, Agnes Cloverall. Ma'am trembled and her breath came in gasps. It's brain fever, she moaned. Our Thomas will be dead before dawn. 'Tis not brain fever. Indeed, 'tis far worse than that. Granny seized Ma'am's hand and held it tight. This baby is not Thomas, she said. They came for yours and left theirs in his place. No, Ma'am cried. Look at him. Of course he's our Thomas. Don't you think I know my own baby? Granny waved her hand in front of Ma'am's and my eyes. Look again, Agnes Cloverall, and tell me what you see in that cradle. Ma'am and I stared at the cradle. What lay there was long and scrawny, its face as wrinkled as an old man's and its eyes as yellow as a cat's. Tufts of hair finer than milkweed spores sprouted from his head. He glared at us, kicking his skinny legs, and howled like a wild thing. Never had I seen a creature so ugly. Ma'am screamed. No, it cannot be. Oh, let it not be, Granny. I longed to take Ma'am's hand and comfort her, but I backed away in shame. This was my doing, I said. I said what I shouldn't have said. I'd taken his necklace and worn it myself. If Ma'am learned what I'd done, she'd never forgive me. I pressed my hand to my chest and covered the tiny bump of the locket under my dress. Ma'am turned to Granny, her eyes wild with fear and rage. Get this creature out of my house, she cried. It mustn't sully Thomas's cradle. Granny took Ma'am's arm and forced her to look at the creature. It's a hard thing I'm asking you to do, Agnes Cloverall, but you must keep him. Treat the changeling with kindness, nurse him, sing to him, rock him as if he were your own sweet Thomas. Have you lost your wits? Ma'am asked. Nurse that creature? I can't. I won't. If you refuse to do it, I myself will take him to the crossroads tonight and leave him there. They can come for him or not. I want my own child, not this monster. Be still and listen. Granny's grip on Ma'am's arm tightened. If you treat this changeling well, they'll treat Thomas well. But if you treat him badly, you can be sure your child's life with them will be filled with misery and suffering. If I mistreat this creature, they will mistreat Thomas? That's their nature. They and theirs come first, even the ones they don't want. We and ours come last. Excuse me. She paused a moment. If the changeling grows strong and healthy on human milk, they might take him and return yours. Mind you, it doesn't happen often, and I make no promises. There's a chance you'll get your Thomas back, but only if you please them. Ma'am returned her gaze to the cradle. Tears ran down her face. I do this not for you, but for Thomas, she told the changeling, my own true child who's been taken from me. With tears running down her face, she lifted the changeling and opened her dress. He began to suck at once. The only noise then was the sound of him nursing. Loud, slurping, as greedy as a piglet and many times uglier. Granny Hedgepath steered me toward the door. Leave your ma'am alone with it, she said. She must have peace and quiet if she's to nurse the changeling. She led me to a stone bench in the garden and sat beside me. Thomas's quilt lay on the grass, rumpled and empty, a pitiful reminder of my little brother. It were you, weren't it? You said what you shouldn't have said. Granny Hedgepath held my arms tightly and forced me to face her. Tell the truth. I'll know if you're lying, you wretched girl. Trembling with fear and guilt, I dared not confess to Granny. I tried to pull away, but the old woman's fingernails bit into my skin, and I whimpered, Answer me! Granny shook me so hard my head bounced, as if the old woman meant to scramble my brains. Careless, stupid girl! You praised Thomas, did you not? You boasted. You drew their attention. I didn't mean to speak aloud, I cried. The words were just supposed to stay in my head, but... The old woman shook me again. I knew it the day I came with the locket, and you hid in the shadows, sly as a snake. You were jealous of your brother. You wanted them to take him away. No, no. I tried to escape the old woman's hold. I love Thomas. Granny Hedgepath shoved her face into mine. So we were nose to nose. Anger danced in her eyes. I see the wickedness in you. I turned my head away from Granny's face. Yes, I envied Thomas, but not enough to want the kind folk to take him. No, surely I didn't. I wasn't that sort of sister. If only the old woman would go away. I couldn't bear the strange, earthy, smoky smell of her, or the feel of her cloak, coarse and scratchy and old against my skin. Her breath was raspy, and its odor was a mixture of herbs and spices and stale food. Once more I tried to free myself, but she didn't loosen her grip. Suddenly, she pulled the locket out of my dress and unfastened it, then held it in front of me. So you took the locket! I wondered why it hadn't kept the dear baby safe. Thomas gave it to me. He wanted me to have it. It was just for a little while. I meant to give it back, but... I began to cry. The old woman was right. I was indeed a bad sister, a horrible sister, the worst sister a baby brother could ever have. I didn't want them to take him either. I didn't. She leaned even closer to me and hissed into my ear. How do you like your new baby brother? Is he what you wanted? Without waiting for an answer, Granny Hedgepath hurled the necklace at me and strode toward the gate. Shaking with anger, I shouted after her. Don't you dare call that monster my brother! Granny Hedgepath looked back. Best learn to mind your tongue, or it will forever bring you trouble. With the swirl of her tattered cloak, the old woman strode through the gate and out of my sight. Not knowing what else to do, I fastened the chain around my neck and hid the locket again under my dress. I was no longer comforted to feel it against my skin, but I didn't want anyone else to know I had it. A few moments later, Dado came down the lane whistling, his work in the fields done for the day. Usually I ran to meet him. When I was little, he'd hoist me onto his shoulders and carry me home. How tall I felt perched up high. I could see over the green fields all the way to Mirkwood, lying like a dark shadow at the mountain's feet. He'd laugh and say, Shall I take you to Mirkwood and leave you there with the kind folk? No, Dado, no. I'd cling to him, terrified. of that dark wood and its mysteries. Never had I gone there, and never would I go. This evening I didn't run to meet Dado. I sat on the bench and dreaded what he'd do once he saw the changeling in the cradle he made for Thomas. Dado stopped in front of me. "Why, Molly, what are you doing sitting here all by yourself without a word of greeting?" A loud screeching in the cottage saved me from answering. "That can't be our Thomas," Dado said, "wailing like a starving cat." He looked at me as if he expected an answer. In a small voice, I said, "You're right, Dado. It's not our Thomas." I'd spoken too low for Dado to hear. With a puzzled face, he went into the cottage, and I followed slowly. Scooping up the changeling, he looked at Mam. "What's the matter with our Thomas? He looks a bit poorly." Mam began to cry. I turned to Dado to explain, but before I opened my mouth, Dado asked, "Has Granny Hedgepath seen him, Agnes? He looks worse than I first thought." Yes, she's been here and gone," Mom sobbed. "There's nothing she can do." "It must be bad if Granny can't help." Dado held the changeling close and rocked him gently. "Never fear, Thomas. We'll make you well again. There are other healers who know as much or more than Granny Hedgepath." "Sam, are you blind?" Mam cried. "That's not Thomas in your arms." Dado smiled down at the changeling, who stared back with strange, wide eyes. "Don't be daft," Dado said. "If he's not Thomas, who is he?" He laughed as if Mom were making a joke. So I can kind of tell there that the word daft must be crazy, because he's like, of course this is Thomas. Who else would it be? I snatched the changeling from Dado and held him in front of his face. "Look at him!" I screamed. "Can you see this is not Thomas?" Shrieking, the changeling wriggled and fought to escape, but I held him tightly. "They took Thomas today and left this in his place." Dado still didn't see the truth. "They?" "They," Mam said. "You know very well who Molly means, Sam. Look at the baby properly." Dado stared at the screaming creature in my arms. His face changed from worry about Thomas's health to horror at what he finally saw. "It cannot be," he whispered. "We've been so careful, Agnes. We've not said a word to draw them to our door." Fearing he'd hurl the changeling at the wall, I took the strange baby from Dado. Shouting to make myself heard above the wailing, I said, "They came with their sickly baby and took Thomas away with them." Dado groaned and turned away from me. "We cannot keep their wicked creature." "We must," Mam told him. "Granny Hedgepath says if we treat the changeling well, they'll treat Thomas well. If their sickly one thrives, they'll sometimes bring back the one they took and take their own away with them." "They'll never bring back our Thomas," Dado said. "I'll carry their cast off to the crossroads this very night and leave him there for them to take or not." "No," Mam took the wailing changeling from me. "We'll do as Granny Hedgepath says. We must, Sam, for Thomas's sake." Dado watched her feed the changeling. I cannot bear the sight of this. Without another word, he strode out of the college. Mam ran to the door and called after him. "Where are you going, Sam?" "To the tavern. There, I'll hear no screaming, yowling brat." "When will you be home?" Mom cried. "Not until you've taken that thing to the crossroads. I'll not sleep under this roof until it's gone." Dado opened the door and nearly ran from the cottage. I put my arms around Mam and pressed my head against her side. Above me, the changeling kicked and squirmed and nursed as if he were starving. "Dado will come back," I said, my heart breaking as I spoke. "He will. I know he will." Mam pushed me away. "Leave me be, Molly. I don't need you tugging at me, too." Gone was Mam's rosy face. Gone were her dimples. Gone was her smile. From the worn, sad look of Mam, she might as well have been a changeling herself. Late that night, I lay in bed in the loft, hoping to hear Dado come home before I fell asleep. But the only sounds were the changeling's wails and shrieks and Mam's weary attempts to rock it to sleep. No footsteps in the lane, no sound at the door, no voice calling out Mam's name. I felt the locket under my nightgown. I'd wear it forever, not because it was pretty, but as a reminder of what I've done. All right, and that is the end of chapter 2, so I'll see you guys tomorrow with chapter 3. Take care.